Welcome to Aim for the Middle EQ, where we discuss the spectrums of thoughts and behaviors and how emotional intelligence, or EQ, can make or break all aspects of your life. Today in my studio, I've got Amelia Riling. Hi, Amelia.
Hi.
Who is passionate about domestic violence awareness. And today we're specifically going to be discussing narcissistic abuse. We're going to be discussing narcissists and how to recognize them, what may predispose you to being in a relationship with the narcissist or even just being surrounded by them in your life, how to recognize the cycle of abuse, the long-term effects of abuse, and how to handle a narcissist in your life. Now, we've all had that experience of being with your average jerk or a Karen, but there's an actual psychological disorder that's a version of what we classify as a narcissist, but they're actually undiagnosed narcissistic personality disorder. It's a real disorder, and it causes people to have a severe deficiency in empathy. Now, I want to point out before we start speaking that not all abusers are narcissists, and not all narcissists are abusers. However, they are more likely to abuse physically, emotionally, financially because of that lack of empathy. There's an overt and a covert narcissist. And most people are aware of the overts because the overts are the ones that are arrogant, loud, extroverted, they're bragging, they're the ones that are all me, 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 me. But the covert narcissist is a little more difficult to pick up on. You're more likely to recognize it if you've lived with one. And if you're dating one, it takes a couple months to figure it out. But they end up being the ones that are chronic complainers, and they tend to be so self-absorbed with their own inadequacies and their own problems that they can't see outside their own personal bubble. But anyway, back to Amelia here. Amelia, why don't you tell us a little bit about how your passion for domestic violence awareness and narcissistic abuse began?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dotty. So I grew up in domestic violence. I experienced bullying in school, but I didn't really recognize what narcissistic abuse looked like until high school. I met a friend in high school when I was 17, and he would make inappropriate sexual remarks. He would brag about himself constantly. He would also accuse me of the very things that he was guilty of at times.
That's called gaslighting for you folks out there.
Yes. So it was just very odd. And I chose to ignore the red flags. Mm-hmm. So I continued this friendship with him until college. He had gone to University of Southern California for directing, for film school. And I was at Indiana University. And we had worked on a short film together where he took advantage of me business-wise on the short film. And it was just very unpleasant, but he flipped the script. He accused me of what he had been doing and then started to spread rumors and turn people against me. It was a very nasty situation. And it affected me psychologically because I was not educated about narcissistic abuse during that time. Mm-hmm. And so it just shocked me, and I developed anxiety and had to take medicine, and it kind of spiraled me out of control. Mm-hmm. So I wish I had been educated about it. I wish I had known what I was dealing with and who I was dealing with.
Right. It does help if you're more aware of the narcissists that are in your life, like coworkers or project personnel like she had in her life. And it tends to make you more aware of how not to add fuel to that fire and more conflict resolution when you're in those types of situations.
I would agree with that. I think for me, the things that I've learned are to manage conflict with different personality types, and managing conflict with somebody who has that disorder can be very challenging, but education is key. That's my personal opinion, definitely.
Right. So do you think in that situation that you were already predisposed to narcissistic abuse?
Yes.
In order to, have trauma from that one?
Yes, that's a good question. So I was a people pleaser.
Okay.
I was bullied in middle school, and I believe that the way I coped with that was to try to please everybody and to not have boundaries.
Right.
And I think I was not self-aware of my own hurts and my own trauma. And I would blame myself. And sometimes in this particular case of narcissistic abuse, people blamed me because they believed him, and he was very charming,
right,
and very manipulative. So certain people couldn't see through it. So they blamed me and they believed his side of the story. Now, the people who actually knew me knew he was lying.
Oh, good.
But the people who didn't know me well fell for his facade.
Right. And this happens a lot in families or in any group dynamics. If there's a narcissist involved, there's almost always a scapegoat. And the scapegoat becomes the one that gets blamed for everything that's going on when it's actually the narcissist. And this might take some time for the people who don't really know the victim to understand what's really happening. And I know in my own personal group situations that it would take up to a whole year for someone to have their name cleared because they're believing this charming narcissist who's so popular, and they don't understand it until they're like, oh, wow. And then it becomes a whole game of saving face at that point.
Definitely. And I feel like people with narcissistic personality disorder can also target one person and then be nice to everybody or certain other people.
Right.
So that they put on a show for the right types of people to side with them.
Exactly.
And then the target, they just devalue them. They make them look a certain way.
It completely invalidates the victim and the person. These people can be higher up in their job functions, like in executive management. They can be your parents. They could be other people that are just well known and popular, and so they have an image to uphold, and they can't possibly admit fault, and so everyone else is the problem. So that is very difficult to deal with.
It is, and you actually identified something very key to, I think, narcissistic personality disorder is like an abuser that actually admits fault and is working on themselves isn't likely to have extreme narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
But somebody who really has that personality disorder deeply entrenched inside of them might not see it and have lowered empathy.
Right.
So they don't typically admit that they're wrong. They deflect.
Yes. So we have all of these people that we're coming into contact with that are undiagnosed narcissistic personality disorder. And they're undiagnosed because they literally don't know they have a problem or are willing to admit that they have a problem in order to go to a psychologist to even get formally diagnosed. So that diagnosis is actually extremely rare, but there are some red flags that will let you know whether or not you're dealing with a narcissist or just your average Joe having a bad day or your average Karen with control issues. But there are some definite red flags of how to determine if you're dealing with a narcissist, whether it's in your workplace or whether it's at your house or even in your friend circle or someone you're dating. I do you want to go first on what your red flags were?
Go for it. No. You go ahead, Dotty.
Well, in dating world, I have found that a lot of the narcissists seem to have a history of crazy exes. Like literally every single ex of theirs was a crazy ex. And at that point you have to look, well, if in your history you have every single one of your exes is crazy, you have to really look, okay, what is the common denominator at this point? So, I mean, they're basically gaslighting and scapegoating on each one of their exes just to save face and saying they're not the problem because they don't have an ability of being self-aware to know what those things are. And I've also noticed that a few of them, some of them come across as very, very popular. But if you really take a deeper dive into their social circle, a lot of those friendships are very superficial. They literally know everybody's name. They'll say hi to everyone in the room. But when it comes to like, they actually have a problem and need to talk to somebody or they need help or whatever, they literally have no one to go to because these people don't actually know them or actually like them. These are going to be people that have tons of friends on their Facebook, always texting, always on their phone. They're very, very social outward, especially the overts. I'm sorry, the covert ones are a little more shy, but the overt ones seem to know everyone and they will name drop like crazy. They're big name droppers. They want you to like them because of who they know. And but their actual social circle is very, very superficial.
I think also, Dotty, is one thing I've noticed is, and I have encountered multiple people with narcissistic personality disorder, but it's on a spectrum. Some
Oh,
people
yeah.
have it more intensely than others. I think it's a case by case basis of dealing with each person who may have the personality disorder, or they may just have narcissistic traits and it's not like full blown
Right.
personality disorder. So it's important to be accurate when you encounter someone that you think may have a little bit of arrogance or a little bit of narcissism versus the personality disorder. And also, how far along on the spectrum are they with that personality disorder? Do they have some empathy, or do they have very little empathy, or is it in the middle somewhere? So I think it's very important to assess the situation on a case by case basis.
That is very true. And some of the narcissists that, some of the people who are not narcissists, they do have these traits that make them seem like narcissists. And we kind of toss the term around pretty lightly in the society to anybody who has made any sort of selfish decision, and we label them as narcissists. Not all people that have narcissistic traits are actual narcissists, but if they have a history of actual life dysfunction, that's one of the DSM criteria for diagnosing any mental disorder. It has to severely impact most areas of your life. So if it's impacting their relationships, their jobs, a lot of these people are job hoppers. That's another red flag. They can't seem to not have confrontation or issues with the people they work with. They don't have a consistent friend base. It seems like they're always overturning friends, going group to group to group, and until they finally move to cities. I've actually witnessed that before too.
Of course, they tend to be exploitive. Yes. In their tactics. I agree.
Right. And so and if you're working with them and they're in upper management, they tend to have a high employee overturn. So these people often quit repeatedly and they can't keep people in the position because the manager is so controlling and so narcissistic, and everything has to be their way, and they blame everyone around them except for themselves when things aren't going according to plan. So that's how you identify those at work. But there are people in your friend base or people you are dating that might also try to change, it seems like, nearly everything about you. They will comment on the way they like your hair, not just complimenting you. I'm talking about, oh, I like it better that way, or, oh, I wish you hadn't cut your hair because you look so good like this, or whatever. Or trashing the way they dress, wanting to change. Yeah. I even had a guy once that came up to me and said, I would really like for you to take my girlfriend shopping. I am not kidding. He actually hated the way she dressed and wanted me to take her shopping so that she could look more like me. That was
he nice about it,
rude.
or was he just like trying to put her down?
To me, he was, but to her, he was super rude all the time, super condescending, very controlling. I mean, he was so bad that like he could care less whether or not she wanted to have sex. Like he was basically date raping her all the time, and it became an escape situation where she had to get out of there. This guy, no, he's super narcissistic. And he always tries to get people and to just like, I guess he's always trying to bully people by trying to get people on his side, get people to think that this person is bad and try to attack another person. And he'll go out of his way and start, bar fights. He's gotten in fights with people like DJs and things like that.
That's terrible.
I know. So there's severe examples of it. And you could tell that guy was a classic narcissistic personality disorder person. It's not just the people who are just randomly mean or rude, but so if they typically have those constant situations with people where they're constantly confrontational, that is another red flag. They also, in terms of conflict resolution, it is very difficult to even resolve a conflict with an actual narcissist.
It's almost like a special subset of conflict management skill.
Yes, no, more really, like crisis management.
Yeah, it's like more crisis management right. And trying to mitigate the situation to a level where it's like, it's still going to be inflammatory. It's still going to be difficult. But I would recommend, like, conflict management aside, like researching how to deal with narcissists in general, like the skill sets that are needed, because it is a special case.
Right.
It is.
Especially if you're not in a, romantic relationship with them, whether it's a little easier to leave if they don't have a financial hold over you. If you're at work with them and you literally have to deal with them until you get another job, or if this narcissist is your parent or your child, you can't just up and leave the situation, and you're going to need some safety measures in place for crisis management and how to not add fuel to that fire. But these people, I feel like the main characteristic is extreme defensiveness. Now, anybody gets defensive over of critiques or whatever, but I'm talking extreme.
It can be like, I believe they call it like narcissistic rage.
Yes.
I think that's the term. So like, I have a couple family members that suffer from, I suspect, they haven't been officially diagnosed, that suffer from
as
this
usual
disorder.
Right.
But when you try to explain, like if they're spreading a rumor or saying something inaccurate or hurtful, they can go into narcissistic rage.
Right. Yes. If they are caught in a lie, they'll goodness.
Deflect. They deflect. They say, no, you did it, or you're the problem, or whatever, even though there's concrete evidence for what they're doing.
And at some point, if they are known to have violent outrages, you want to back out. I'm sorry, but safety is
walk away. Don't argue with them.
Safety is more important than being right in this situation. You cannot argue with crazy. I'm sorry, but if they are raging out and in that situation, it doesn't matter if they're lying, and you know that that you are right.
Learn to walk away. Learn to walk away, because I know you
nod and smile and get away.
I had to tell somebody that, like, they kept saying, well, I have to defend myself. And I told them, I was like, you've got, and this wasn't pertaining to a narcissistic person, but just a regular fight. But some people want to prove their point. That's fine.
Yes. No.
But in certain cases where it's escalating to the point of violence, I strongly believe it's more mature and it's better to walk away.
Right. If their argument is getting louder and louder and improving your argument is not working, personal safety is the best. They tend to do get loud when they're narcissistically raging. And they will, you have to separate your emotions at this point. It is not how you feel. It is about your safety. You are no longer in this interaction to be right, or to be heard, or to maintain your pride. These are literally secondary to your safety.
It's wisdom to know the difference. It's wisdom to know the difference. And I also want to point out, Dotty, when we were talking about family members or certain people who have those traits, over the years, the two family members that I'm thinking of that had this personality disorder, I suspect, or these narcissistic traits, is they lack empathy, but it can be developed over the years. Like, I strongly believe, some people think there's no hope for them, but I've seen...
It depends on how far in the extreme.
The spectrum.
Or if they have a dual diagnosis of sociopathy.
Right. But it can be, it's not that it's your responsibility as the victim of abuse to do that for them, but I strongly do believe that empathy skills can be developed.
Right.
I do believe that. Now, as somebody who's been a target of abuse, I don't find it to be my responsibility to
fix them.
To fix the abuser. I think that's something the church, they teach sometimes. Like, I've had certain people say, well, it's your responsibility to save them. And this is awful advice from faith-based people. Not all of them say this, but some people will say it's your responsibility to help them. And I think that's a very dangerous recommendation.
But it's also, though, an innate thing for overly empathetic people, because they literally want to help. They want to fix them. They end up getting in this codependent relationship with the narcissist and the empath, trying to fix the problem. But the thing is, if they're literally on that extreme side of the narcissistic spectrum, you cannot fix them. They need a professional.
So I think the key thing is, if somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder is somewhat self-aware and wants to work on themselves, I think that's the key to change. Is there are going to be future mistakes. You can't expect perfection from these people, or anybody really. But if they are taking steps to get help, I can see somewhat of a relationship, but like a distant relationship. You can help them, but I think professional help
Right.
is key. And what I see, Dottie, is multiple people kind of helping this person. So the burden doesn't fall on one person.
It takes a village.
It takes a village. It absolutely takes a village with any mental health problem, not only NPD or narcissistic personality disorder, but any person who has a mental health problem. I think it takes a village. It should be different people at different times.
Right.
It should be strategic. And then that way the burden doesn't fall on one person.
Yes, it can cause extreme burnout.
Yes.
I mean, extreme and mental fatigue. It's horrible. I know personally I've had to take a break from a couple of different people in my life that I want to maintain that friendship, but it was getting to the point where every time I was around them, they were screaming and yelling, and it was just taking such a toll on me. I would have to just draw back and then, wait 6 months to a year, and then, then we can maintain contact again. And that was also their cue to go get help too.
Definitely.
Like one of them went to therapy. Okay, wow, I'm alienating people at work. I'm alienating people in my life, like in my personal life. My children hate me. They have to hit a rock bottom of sorts to decide that they need that help.
But there is hope, is what you're saying. You can take those breaks.
If they want it.
If they want the help, if they seek out treatment. And I think the key is to not expect perfection. There will be pitfalls, there will be relapses. It's a disease. Right. It's a perceptual disease.
Right.
So there will be relapses, but to continue forward in that journey, and you don't have to be present throughout the entire journey, but as you feel led to reach out or be there, go with your gut instinct.
Right. And that's one of the boundaries that we have to draw is at what point do you need to cut ties or take a break or say, this is how much I will handle, this is how much I won't. And also knowing that person's triggers. Like if you know that they're having problems at work, you know that they're having problems at home, and you know that they're going to be a certain way, and you can't tolerate it. Have your own personal time limit of how much time you're going to spend with this person before you absolutely have to leave, or knowing when to walk away for good.
And to maybe meet in public, right? If they go into narcissistic rage.
Oh, I've had that happen in public too.
Yeah, I mean, it may happen in public, but at least you have a safety net with people surrounding you who see it, who can call the police or whatever.
Right.
But I think it's very important. If you suspect somebody who goes into narcissistic rage will become violent, I think it's very important to meet in public.
Right.
I do.
And I know people feel bad when they're empathetic. That, well, it's a mental illness. They want to help them. And yes, but if it's degrading your own mental health, you really have to draw some boundaries of what is acceptable to you and what is not, and what you can handle and what you can't. Going back to some of those other red flags, you might feel like you never do anything right. Like they don't compliment things that you do correctly. It's always pointed out what the negative is. And this isn't just normal critiquing. This is constant. It's like a pattern. You just don't do anything right. At home, it could be not cooking right, not cleaning right, not ironing right, whatever it is. And at work, it could literally be just damn near anything.
It feels like nitpicking. It feels like it's not legitimate.
Right.
It's like they're doing it to do it because of their own internal problems. It's not very legitimate in the grand scheme of things.
A lot of them end up being having some OCD in order to maintain control of their environment, to reduce their own anxiety. And it comes across as being very controlling to everyone around them. And because of that, it's very difficult for them to point out positives. It can be trained, though. I mean, we usually train people to say 3 positive things before you say something that's a critique, and use it as an I feel language, and don't blame or whatever. They can be taught to do it differently. But on the extreme end, and especially the older they are, the harder they are to change.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And another one of the red flags was not being, that the empathy is gone and losing perspective for other people, but they don't seem to want to ever listen to when you have a problem. But if they have a problem, oh my gosh, they'll talk for hours about it. But you bring something up. I've literally had somebody say, well, this has nothing to do with me, so I'm going to go, and then leave. Or I don't know why we're talking about this. This has nothing to do with me.
That's terrible. It's
Right.
a one-sided relationship.
Very, very one-sided. I've even had a person I dated once upset with me for being upset that my best friend had died. He was literally jealous of my grieving process because it took the attention away from him.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it just was, wow.
Insane.
And then we wanted to touch base about the cycle of abuse because this, if you're in a dating situation, like the cycle of abuse, we were talking earlier personally that in your families don't really have cycles of abuse because they have no need to make sure that you're still there. Like you already belong to that family. It doesn't pertain to when your parent or your child is a narcissist because they already have you in that relationship. This pertains mostly to dating relationships where they need to pull you back in after they've already pushed you away with whatever types of abuse. So the main parts of the cycle of abuse is that there's this calm phase and where you think everything's hunky-dory, and then you'll feel the tension just building up over time. And then there'll just be an explosion of whatever the incident is. And then they go back, and this is the confusing part, to this honeymoon phase of love bombing you, being super nice, and being the way you remember them being. And they depend on that part of the cycle so that you'll stay. And some cycles of abuse are really only like 1 to 10% of abuse. And so people will stay with this person in the clinging hope of that 1 to 10% of 99% that they're going to be good to them. And so a lot of people don't understand why they're not leaving their abusers. And that's why, because they might be in an abusive relationship, but it's really only a tiny fraction of what that is. But you just have to emphasize the dangers for that.
Definitely, especially if there's like physical violence and like trauma bonding exists, you can develop emotions towards the good parts of somebody or the supposedly good parts of somebody, and then dismiss the negative parts, hoping that it never emerges again. And especially if they say it'll never happen again, or they manipulate an apology that's not genuine, maybe.
Right.
Some apologies I'm sure are genuine, but if they have those tendencies for domestic violence, they may not even know how to solve it themselves unless they seek professional help or learn how to deal with it themselves.
Yeah, it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome that you get over them because, even though you have this bank robber and they're a bad person, they've already shot somebody or whatever, the longer you spend with them and the more you're trying to you're in self-preservation mode, that you actually bond with this person out of like a self-protection. And that's what forms that trauma bond. And it's harder to break.
It's like a dissonance thing. Like when you see a discrepancy in somebody's behavior, you don't want to believe the harsh truth that they have that aspect to them. So you kind of just either overlook it or you subtly make it less than what it actually is.
Right. That first time you kind of blow it off as like, wow, I don't know what that was. And then you kind of move on. The second time you're like, oh no, this is an actual personality problem.
And then, sometimes you lie to yourself. You say it's not a big deal when in fact it is a very big deal.
So what do you think? We were talking before about certain people's reactions to abuse and why people don't talk about it.
I personally think it's because I was blamed for the abuse I encountered, even with some people who believe, like one person who eventually understood it. I feel like some people don't understand the trauma bond. They don't understand that sometimes when you're naive or you don't know how to manage the conflict or you don't know how to stand up for yourself, or sometimes, you make a mistake, you overlook the red flags, whatever it may be, they'll still blame you for being abused, even though you are not responsible for somebody else's action.
Right. There's another phrase in psychology for that. We call blaming the victim. And this happens a lot. Well, what could you have done to prevent this? And we will talk about a little bit of what predisposes you to it and how to not get in these situations. But even if you are in that situation, it is not your fault. Like that, it's not because you did certain things or whatever. It's still their fault.
I totally agree. And I think sometimes I've seen this multiple times, not only with myself, but maybe even other people too. I think this is a common thing in society, is to blame the victim. And I think sometimes it's an innate fear in the bystanders who see it and who may blame the victim. It's like, I don't want it to happen to me. It couldn't happen to me. It somehow has to be their fault. Whatever the reasons are, I think it's extremely harmful, and that bystanders and people's reactions, they also need to dialogue and learn that this isn't appropriate behavior, and it re-victimizes
No doubt.
the victim.
Right.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that people think that I've found anyway, that the judgment's not just like toward me, but other people.
Yes.
They seem to think that there's something wrong with the victim, and that's why they keep, or they're in that situation in the first place. I think there's some sort of weak individual, which is not even true. A lot of narcissists will actually seek out very strong women or successful people who are popular, people who actually look good for their image.
That's correct.
And then the people who are victimized are like shocked, like, wow, I feel so stupid. I'm like a really smart person, and I somehow still ended up in this situation. Like, how is that possible? Because
they're attracted to that. Yes.
They're very skilled at what they do. They know how to manipulate you. They know how to charm. They're very good at it. So
I agree with you. Thank you for saying that. Because, Dotty, I think narcissistic people who have that personality disorder are attracted to successful and, beautiful women. And like, I would agree with that. I've seen that. And so they are targets in themselves.
Right.
Yes.
And they also target high levels of empathy as well.
Yes.
A lot of times.
Women.
A lot of times. Yeah. Because they see something that they don't have themselves, and they're attracted to it. But also, they want things to be about them. The more empathetic they are, the more likely that they're going to have that narcissistic, what do they call that? Narcissistic feedback? I forget the term.
I think I understand what you're saying. It's like they get validation, or they get like the
I can't believe I forget this term.
No, it's okay. But they get validation, and it feeds their narcissistic personality disorder. They get the validation that they want, their sense of self-worth. I think what's sad about people with narcissistic personality disorder is they don't have a strong sense of identity in terms of who they are as a person. I'm not saying all of them, but who they are as a person. So they seek validation from other people, and they seek intimacy, like that validation. If they don't get it, they become dangerous, right? Or they can't take the criticism, or they can't take the feedback. And
supply.
Yeah, it's a narcissistic
supply.
The victim is the narcissistic supply. Yes. Correct. But I think it's an identity problem. Like, a narcissistic personality disorder people have to manipulate, or not have to, but sometimes they manipulate or exploit others unknowingly to feed their sense of self-worth. I also think that in addition to being empathetic, that having previous abuse or trauma experiences can lead to being further abused. And as I said before, when I was bullied when I was younger, I was a people pleaser. Right. I thought I was the problem. So I had to cater to everybody. And I believe that's what led to my being abused in the future by this man from high school and throughout college, and even after college. He still monitors me online. Like, he subscribed to my YouTube channel recently with his wife's name. But I know that it's likely him or her or whatever. But I just think it's very important to understand why sometimes we people please, or sometimes why we are in these situations may be that we blame ourselves, or we don't have strong boundaries or strong self-esteem to understand that it's okay to say no. It's okay to distance yourself. It's okay to cut ties. You're not a mean person. You're respecting yourself, and you're respecting that other person by saying you can do better too.
Well, I think a lot of it is the people pleasing is out of fear. We are trying to minimize confrontation.
Yes.
Like, it becomes an area of growth for the victim to learn how to have confrontation and conflict resolution skills without being scared, like being assertive, but not adding fuel to the fire with being aggressive, and making sure that you can draw those boundaries with this person and not be too scared to.
You know what? You really reached me with that one, because I think I remember apologizing to this guy in hopes that he would stop abusing me.
Right.
It was fear-based.
I love that.
It was fear-based apologizing. And I knew I wasn't wrong to a certain degree. I knew that I was just trying to get him to stop abusing me. It didn't work.
Right.
It just fed the fuel for him to continue abusing me.
Well, and you can tell just getting to know you over the past few days, like that you do apologize for little silly things.
Yes.
Like
and it's
putting your paper
abuse.
in a certain place or whatever. Yeah, that is a total trauma response.
Yes. Yes.
And by projecting that, it does make you available more for victimization for narcissists.
Yes.
That constant apologizing. Excuse me.
It is fear-based because I still feel that fear with that one individual. It's like I dread it when I think of him or when I saw him subscribe with his wife's name, or maybe it was her, I don't know, but it was just this feeling of fear and dread at times. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really scary. I know that I'm also, in terms of confrontation, I literally cannot stand and have a strong boundary against yelling now. I cannot stand pounding, yelling, throwing, anything like that. I will just walk away and just never talk to them again because I can't tolerate it. My own stuff just comes up and I know that I can draw the line and that I don't have to put up with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the effects of abuse, do you mind me going into like how it affected me?
Oh,
like
of course.
The over apologizing,
right.
blaming myself for it. But I developed an anxiety problem in college and even after college. It interfered with my ability to function at jobs. I was constantly filled with anxiety and worst case scenarios. And they were all trauma based, like all stemming from trauma. I was pre-med in college. I had tested out of a year of biology and tested into honors chem at IU, but I had to drop out of it because of the anxiety problems. I never could finish all the pre-med courses. It lowered my self-esteem. I found myself in other cycles of abuse, maybe not as severe as it was with that guy from high school and college, but just more cycles of abuse. I couldn't set the boundary because I kept blaming myself. I kept over apologizing out of fear, questioning myself. It was very hard to break that cycle of abuse.
I totally understand. I think it's actually amazing that you and I are as assertive as we are.
Yes.
Like that took training on my part. I was to the point where I would literally just shut down.
No, I understand it.
And I wouldn't respond because I was afraid that anything I would say would make it worse.
Sometimes they use it against you. I know.
That too.
Yeah.
And so how did you go about coming to that? How did you go from not being able to say anything and keep apologizing to actually being assertive without being overly aggressive? Some people swing to that other end of the spectrum.
I think what I had to do, so I believe in respecting people. So in order to respect someone, let's say you're bullying me. In order to respect you, I need to be upfront about your behaviors for your own self-improvement. That's how I switched it in my mind.
Right.
I'm not respecting that person's intrinsic worth by allowing them or letting them continue to think that it's okay to behave that way. So I did it out of respect towards the abuser and respect for them to improve themselves.
Although, if you're in a crisis situation where they're seeming to get violent, don't do it then.
Yes, no,
I mean, wait for that to calm down.
That's a different scenario.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So this is like after they calm down, if this person is your kid or your parent and you still have to socially interact with them, you have to be able to draw those boundaries. And it takes a while because you're so used to just shutting down, like, okay, so that didn't go well. And you just kind of leave.
Definitely.
But you don't want to give them permission to keep treating you like that.
Definitely. And it is a respect issue, not only towards yourself, but towards the other person. Sometimes they make it seem like you're not being nice if you're assertive. But in response to that, I would say I am being nice because I'm respecting you by being, number one, being honest. And number two, by respecting you enough to want you to be a better version of yourself. Right.
And you do it in a way, I need a whole podcast on conflict resolution. I might bring you back for that. But there are ways to do it that will disarm the person Although in extreme cases of narcissistic, yes,
yeah.
if they're really extreme, it won't help. They'll perceive anything as criticism and it'll be bad. But for the people that are kind of like closer to the middle or on the positive end of the spectrum, there are things that you can do to tell them. In fact, I had this one person in my life that I realized that a lot of it was stemming from miscommunication and defensiveness and having just my communications completely misinterpreted. So what I would do is I would have these papers and then we would trade. So you have to wait till this person's mellowed out. You come back into the room together and there's these questions on here. And I actually got this from a mindfulness workbook, which I'll put a link to in my description of this video. And it literally asks on both people, what just happened? What do you think they meant? What did you mean? And then after you're done writing these, you trade papers, and it is almost always an eye-opener.
Yes.
I mean, you're like, oh, wow, I had no idea that's what you meant. And then if you do that enough times, you literally realize that, and it retrains their brain into not always assuming the worst possible meaning or worst possible outcome to what you're saying. And then that's the first step to the conflict resolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
Clarifying the situation. Yes, clarifying the situation is key. Learning to listen and read people correctly and accurately is also key.
And I found that when you write it down, you cannot be interrupted.
No.
So you each have that. You don't get interrupted, and you can read it and then comment.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. And it eliminates the screaming that I can't stand. So that helped out a lot. Let's see. So you have a narcissist in your life. I don't know if they're a coworker or actually, speaking of coworkers, did I tell you I had this job for about a week one time? I lasted a week because this guy, I had just come back off the being a parent for like years, right? And this, you're already laughing because you always find my stories funny. You're assuming it's going to be funny.
I do. I apologize in advance if this is not a funny story, but
they're always funny the way I tell them.
Yes.
No, but anyway, so I had just for the first time decided I want to go back to work. So I put my kids at my mother-in-law's house and I go off to my job. And this guy was nuts. I don't know if he was bipolar or what, but he would be nice one minute and then just absolutely crazy raging the next. But anyway, I dealt with that. That was no big deal because I didn't have to work around him much. But there was this one day where I had to sit in the room. They have one of those complicated phones where you have to press and transfer calls and stuff. I've never done that. Like when I was working last prior to kids in an office, I just had my normal cell phone or my cord phone. And so I had never seen one like this. And so I called him because I knew how to call that number. And I said, I don't know how to work these buttons on the phone. And he had just told me this was my today's task. So it was to answer phones. I don't know how to forward calls or whatever. And he's like, oh, God damn it. He just like slammed the phone down. And he comes over to the other building I'm in. And he was just slamming doors. He was screaming, ranting and raving, like back and forth, back and forth. And then my last straw was when he picked up an umbrella and threw it at me like a paper plane, just like, whoop. And I was like, whoa. So I actually went to HR that day and said, I'm sorry, I can't work here. And they were like, well, he's been having difficulties. We think he's having some Alzheimer's issues. You know, if you stay around a little longer, things are going to change. And I'm like, I can't deal with this, like literally one more hour, let alone a day.
Yeah.
So there's no drawing boundaries with this type of person. And this wasn't even narcissism. This was just mental illness in general. Anybody raging, you can't solve a conflict when they're in that mindset. You just can't. But anyway, so actually that leads right into our next point on crisis intervention. So that's the most dangerous interaction you're going to have with a narcissist. And unfortunately, these can be even like police officers. They can be people in power, whatever. We touched on it a little bit before, but you do not want your pride or your need to be right to be anywhere near the top of your priorities. Those are not even important in this situation. Literally, your safety is. So I actually, my son had an interaction with a narcissistic cop, total power control freak. Actually, he wasn't a police officer. He was a security guard. And this guy was just going off on something he didn't even do. And the security guard was just on this power trip. He's screaming at him and yelling at him and telling him to sit down and whatever. It was actually his friend that was in trouble, and he had nothing to do with the friend. And I actually afterwards told him, you should have really been more cautious. Like, you should not have been arguing with this guy. Like, yes, you were right. Yes, you were, yes, you shouldn't have been sitting in that detention room or whatever, and this had nothing to do with you. But the fact that you were confrontational with this guy when he's on a power kick and he's carrying a baton and a taser, I, as your mother, don't want you to get hurt. Do not start this. I mean, you've got to work on this. Like, you definitely shake your head, nod, be nice, do whatever they say, because this could lead to some seriously bad outcomes.
Use wisdom, think big picture.
Yes.
In the big picture of things, you can always defend yourself later and file a lawsuit.
Exactly. But you don't want to get tased or beaten.
You don't want to be beaten and have to file for injury claims and stuff. So
no
think
doubt.
Big picture. You can always defend yourself later. You can always defend your rights later.
Right.
Mitigate the situation.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just like a power thing. But if you're in a dating situation, or in my case, when that guy was at work throwing stuff at me, you definitely want to leave the room, get out of the situation. Who cares what your job is, or being right, or this guy's, being nutty. It's not even the point. You just want to get out of the field of having things thrown at you. Have you ever been in that type of situation where you had to get out immediately?
Yes, I actually have. It was one of my sisters. Well, long story short, I've been in certain situations where I just leave if I even suspect it'll escalate. Like, even if they're not like violent right away, if I suspect it or if I sense it, I walk away.
That's actually one of the steps. The first step is recognizing what the triggers are.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, if there's a narcissist in your life, you come into contact with them more than once to know this. That first step is going to be what normally sets them off. So what is going on in their life? What are they currently upset about? And then knowing, okay, this is usually right before they're going to flip out. And so you want to maintain your calm, be as rational as possible. Don't raise your voice. Don't blame. Don't use you language. Don't ask them why and put them on the defensive. What are the tips you have?
I actually have a book to recommend that.
Oh, nice.
It's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. It's an older book by, I think it's like an FBI agent or a government agent. But sometimes we dismiss how we feel, or we dismiss our gut instinct, saying it's just emotion, or it's not rational. But if you sense something is wrong, that's in your DNA to sense danger sometimes. Yes. Mm-hmm. And you may not be able to process it mentally or rationally right away. But if you sense something is wrong and you're genuinely not a fearful person in general, and you just can't pinpoint it, the best thing to do is leave, or to take precautions, or do what you need to do to get out of the situation.
Right.
So the gift of fear is not about irrational fears, but rather fear that is instinctual and in your genetics to recognize red flags, and maybe you might process it later in terms of why you felt that way. But respect those gut instincts.
Right. Okay, I just wrote this down. We'll put that link in the description below as well. Any other tips that you think would be good in recognizing triggers or what to do next?
I think if you're in an abusive situation, and Dotty, you had mentioned this, work on an escape plan.
Right.
If you are living with, for example, someone with narcissistic personality disorder, if they have violent, tendencies, the best thing to do is to figure out an escape plan and just, get out of that situation as smoothly as possible, and to have a social support network that you trust.
Yes, call them first before you're planning on leaving. Like, make sure you have people to call and pick you up, or where you're going to go to meet and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. In fact, I actually recommend this to people who are planning on having a conversation to draw boundaries. If you are in a situation with a narcissist, you're going to have to talk to them about drawing boundaries. you suspect this might be a trigger for them, have the plan laid out first before you even bring it up. Know where your car keys are, have the garage door open, have your suitcase already packed and in the car, just in case it gets to that point so that you can leave.
Have an exit strategy. You're
exit strategy
right.
Before the conflict.
Yes.
Before the conflict. Yes.
So mentally brace yourself, basically, and mentally prepare yourself and physically prepare yourself as well. I think, do you want us to move on to like societal prevention or?
I kind of do. I also want to say that most of my followers are in the Fort Wayne area, so I'll put some resource links at the bottom of the descriptions too. If you need to call, usually I think it's 211. Isn't that the overall Indiana number? Yes. 211, just tell them your situation. And that's like an overall every resource in the county. But you can actually, I will put the shelter names down below and other resources for you to contact for people to help with your exit strategy. You also have to know what there's like, I don't want to say a spectrum, but there's usually, you're on somewhere in your journey of trying to leave the situation. So you might be in like this pre-contemplative phase where you kind of think this is not a good situation for me, but you're not sure you want to leave.
Yes.
But then there's a decision like, okay, I want to leave, but I have no idea how to go about doing this. And then you kind of decide to, and then you go with the plan. So if you're in that contemplative stage at all, you need to talk to your friends, your pastor, your just any of your support network prior to help them help you with your exit strategy when these things arise.
And also, I feel like, Dotty, it's important to be, you probably already know this, but adaptable to your plans changing. As you exit out of the situation, things may not be set in stone, but just be adaptable, have hope and resilience, and just know that it will get better.
Right. Now I don't know if you read my writing.
Yes.
You had talked to me about one of the narcissistic abuse methods, and that was the financial
abuse. Yes. I have encountered this personally with a family member where I was financially, when I had my anxiety problems and was struggling job-wise, this family member would financially abuse. It's called financial abuse when they control and monitor your finances. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but she would also control the types of jobs that I had. Like she would emotionally manipulate me into not getting certain types of jobs where I could get out of my situation. I know
so it always had to be just below self-sufficient.
Well, I don't think that was her intention. Ironically, she wanted me to go back into the medical school route. So she'd be like, oh, just work part-time or don't work at all and I'll support you. But she never did support me. So I would fall into this debt. And then I'd get a job, but I was being emotionally manipulated and I was guilt tripped over cups of coffee or a pastry, like any spending with my own money. Right. So that messed with me. Till this day, it messes with me when I think of her guilt tripping me over using my own money towards small expenses.
Right.
It really harmed me emotionally. It's very hard to get over that. But I will say she has gotten better in terms of like being more accepting of how I want to spend my money. Even though I'm older now, she's developed more empathy.
Now, was she actually on your accounts? Like she knew how much you pulled in and spent?
Not necessarily, no, but she would ask questions. I was like, it was such a trauma bond. I would like have to confess guiltily to spending money on a cup of coffee or a dinner or something, like $20 we're talking about. And I would just feel this overwhelming guilt and like question my sanity. It really, it intensified my trauma.
Right. And actually, I don't want to offend you, but yes. When you not only are you an over apologizer, but you actually do that too. You over explain because of
I
it.
do.
And I do too. You have to
justify.
Yes. You constantly feel the need to justify why you're doing things.
Yes.
And people are like, wow, I just wanted to know X, Y, and Z, but like you just gave me way too much information.
But it's like a guilt complex. Yes. It's like this guilt complex that she unintentionally...
And you don't want to be misunderstood to create that conflict.
No. It's like a guilt complex, and it's like I've got to apologize and explain myself and tried to explain that it wasn't intentional. It was like I was sinning against her. Like she was God or something.
Right.
And I was sinning against God.
I need to explain.
Yes. And I need to like repent of my sins to this family figure. So it was just very devastating for me until this and until this day. I still feel that heaviness, that guilt, and that mixture of confusion.
Right.
And I think financial abuse is one of the worst things you can go through because you can't get out of the situation.
Exactly. And that's part of the escape plan too. So when they do have a financial hold of you, when this is usually a parent or a partner or a spouse, they will control and monitor your money and how you're spending. And this is not, I just want to separate this. This is not somebody who's financially helping you. Cause like I do this with my kids, but I don't guilt trip them over every little thing they spend, and I make sure that they have a savings account and then they can just spend the other stuff on
coaching.
Whatever.
That's more coaching.
Yeah.
We're talking about extreme control though.
Yeah.
I'm talking about extreme amounts of control where it's unnatural.
Yeah, I understand. So like usually though, like in a married relationship or whatever, or domestic partnership, you've got two people sharing finances. And so there is going to be some give and take and discussion over what we spend money on, whatever. We're not talking about that. We are talking about like literal extremes of you cannot spend money on anything. They do not want you to be self-sufficient is really their main goal because they want you to depend on them.
And to control you and your behaviors and actions through that.
Yes.
Like, and I don't think, for the record, I don't think with this family member that she was aware of what she was doing and how she was psychologically traumatizing me. But she wanted me to go to med school, so I had to depend on her. But I didn't want to depend on her. I wanted to work.
Be self-sufficient,
It was horrible. It went on for 7 years.
I'm so sorry. So part of your escape plan is actually going to be pilfering money. It's your own, but still trying to sneak little bits here and there over time to make sure you have enough to get out at least for a couple days until you have a more solid place to stay. Like some of those shelters and stuff that you can go to, some of them have a waiting list. You might have to call around to different cities to figure out who has an opening, but so you might end up in a motel for a day or two, or at least need to pay for your food or whatever. So at least have, hopefully a couple hundred on you if you can, before you start a confrontational conversation, or before you're actually going to escape. Because so many times, I worked at a domestic violence shelter, so many times we had recidivism on
relapses.
Yes, of people that would go back to their abusers because they were broke. And
that happened to me multiple times.
They had no other choice.
Yes.
So your finances are huge, and it's a big problem. But there is help.
I do want to state I had a disability during that time with anxiety. It was not treated well. So not only could I not function well at jobs, but I had this authority figure in my family, a female authority figure that was financially abusing me. It just complicated everything. So even when I would go to a shelter or I would go to get help, I had to return.
Oh.
And it was very, very hard.
Out of guilt because you felt bad for leaving?
I felt bad for leaving, and I didn't feel like I had any other choice because I couldn't function well to even pull myself out of the situation.
Yeah, that's self-esteem. Oh, it's awful.
Yes. If you have crippling self-esteem, like low self-esteem, it's very hard to function in general, depending on the level of low self-esteem.
Right.
So I had an authority figure, a female authority figure, and then another family member who kind of mimicked that narcissistic personality disorder. So I had gone to a shelter due to not the authority figure, but the secondary figure, the sibling had narcissistic personality disorder. But it was just something I've learned to deal with. But over the years, Dotty, I will say I'm very grateful these two individuals in the family that have those personality traits have developed more empathy.
That's wonderful.
A miracle, yes. So over the years, I think certain experiences that they've encountered have improved their empathy. So there is hope for them. There is.
That's great.
Yes.
And how did you get yourself to the point where you were able to work, function?
I think one thing I want to point out is so I'm faith-based, but some Christians, not all of them, said that I didn't need medicine, that God would heal me. Now, I know to some of you that may sound a little crazy, but in Christian circles, some of them don't believe in medication. I would go off medications thinking that God would heal me, literally. I don't think that's wise. I think it's important to stay on medication. It's not wrong to take medication. It's important to get therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. I believe EMDR has clinically been proven to work well. Whatever works for you, stick to it. Don't give up hope. Medication is not wrong. It's not weak. It's not a character flaw. Having a mental health issue is not a character flaw. You cannot tough it out. A chemical imbalance that you may have or be predisposed to, you can't tough it out.
Right.
It's okay to take medicine. It's okay to get therapy. It's okay to talk about it with the right types of friends. It's okay to get help.
And I also want to make a point too. It's not just the religious people. There's a lot of wellness people out there that will preach only natural things. Oh, you can use this and use that. I'm actually a supplement person myself. I actually have a couple podcasts I'm going to do on that type of thing. But if you've exhausted all those things, I've tried chamomile and tried valerian root and all the things that supposed to calm me down, but you're still having issue functioning at work or in your social circles. It's totally fine. And I also want to emphasize, I know a lot of people who've tried anxiety meds, and the first one makes them feel weird and they stop and they never try another one again.
Keep trying different ones.
Oh my gosh.
Don't give up hope.
No doubt.
Because I've had the wrong types of medicine. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I've had the wrong medications. There is a right type of medication for you. Well, I don't like interrupting. But there is something out there for you that will work. Don't give up.
Right. And sometimes it's the same medicine. You just need a different dose. And sometimes they can add some to whatever you're doing, and a combination will work really well. It really is a trial and error process. And honestly, it might take up to a year to level out whatever meds you need. And it sounds horrible, but stick with it. It really does help once you figure out what works for you.
Modern day medicine is not wrong. It's not, against God. I mean, science and God go hand in hand, in my opinion. So please don't fall into
And not all
that.
chemicals are bad. Although I do want to advocate, I will do this on other podcasts as well, but if you are on a medicine, do look it up and figure out what it depletes in your system and replenish that through other supplements.
Smart, yes. Know the side effects too.
Yes.
Be aware of the side effects, and
there's an adjustment period for those. Don't give up right away if you can.
Definitely. And also, I would recommend kind of being your own doctor in the sense, of course, go to a doctor, but educate yourself about your mental health, research, stay on top of it.
Yes, do that. Don't just listen to one person either.
No, she's right. Yeah.
There are some doctors that will literally only prescribe whatever a pharmaceutical rep tells them to.
Yes, not all doctors, not all psychiatrists are created equal in terms of, no, I mean, they may have good intentions, but they're not created equal in terms of ability.
Right.
They're not.
I'm so glad we live in a day and age now where people will talk about being on anxiety, depression meds, and that it's normalized, especially the older you get, because whatever mental issues you have tend to get worse with age. Damn near everybody I know over the age of 40 is on something. I'm not kidding. So it is totally normal. It's just like, oh, hey, what do you want at this point? And in like Hollywood, it's like considered trendy.
Well,
who's your psychiatrist, man?
Yeah, there's no shame in it. And it's, again, I just want to reemphasize, it's not a character flaw.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
It's a chemical imbalance. So
we talked about the escape plan. So what would you recommend to people who are trying to get away from family situations where they can't quite leave, but they still have to resolve these conflicts with these narcissists that they're living with, children, parents?
I believe, so I know we had discussed this earlier, Dotty, but it depends on the severity. Like if you have a parental figure that has extreme narcissistic personality disorder, I think it's important to separate them. I know that's not a very popular viewpoint, maybe.
And she's talking about like pulling them out into foster care.
Well, or having them stay with a friend or a friend's parents, but to separate them until that parent gets treatment and is modified to a level where they don't abuse their child.
Right.
Because child abuse can cause mental illness or trigger mental illness. and cause a lot of problems. So I think it depends on the level of narcissistic personality disorder and what's occurring.
Well, the problem I was telling you about that, though, is that because they're undiagnosed, they don't think they have a problem. They're not going to get help and nobody knows it.
Unless there are 3 witnesses. I do feel like if there are people who witness it, not even suspect it. Let's say there's a family friend or somebody that's witnessing it, and then another one. Just have it confirmed maybe 2 or 3 people. Pull them out with a friend to stay with a friend's family and have that narcissistic parent get treatment. I think it's important to intervene carefully. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. And it depends on the extreme level of narcissistic personality disorder, how extreme it is and how bad it is.
We're still really far from that kind of thing because, well, actually, people, I believe it was in the 70s and 80s, if you had a mental illness of any kind, you were pulled from your parents. In fact, I'm a product of that. So my mother was schizophrenic.
Okay.
My biological mom was schizophrenic. And they automatically put me in the system. Just because of that. Like I actually injured myself, the pair of scissors in my eyes, watching the Smurfs. I was like laughing at Gargamel, like doing something funny with Asriel the cat. And I laughed so hard. Everybody knows that laugh. I'm like, wham, right in my eye. And I still feel kind of guilty to this day about that because I actually got taken out of her care because I was injured from some stupid I did because they found out she was schizophrenic. And so back in the 80s and in the 70s, it was the policy to take you out if they had a problem. Although she was medicated, she was treated, she was in therapy, whatever. But when we hit the 90s, I learned this in grad school. They had this timeline of how the policies changed. In the 90s, they actually leave you with the parent and they do the least restrictive environment. So they want to keep the child in their main environment, but make them go get help.
Okay.
But they've done that with like things like schizophrenia, alcoholism, drug abuse, but they haven't filtered it down to like narcissism yet. Like,
well, and you have to be able to assess it correctly and know that it's actually narcissistic personality disorder.
And that's the challenge.
But I do think it's important if it's known by people outside of the family or even within the family that there should be some type of protocol or behavior where the parent gets treatment and the child or the children are separated from that particular parent.
Right.
I think it's very important.
I would actually like to know from anybody watching this to actually make comments in the comment section as to how you feel about that or how we would even go about doing that as a society. And I also wanted to ask you guys what you thought about people who were parents or children of narcissists and how they go about separating from their lives. Like, how have you gone through that, and what steps did you have to take to ensure that happened, and how difficult was that for you? So let's say that you have to interact with a narcissist on a daily basis. They're not normally narcissistic raging at you where you feel like you're in danger. What do you think are some conflict resolution techniques that we can use to kind of like mellow things out so we can deal with them on a daily basis?
I have some ideas. I think some empathy training, like empathy exercises, like role playing, like it's perspective taking. And I'm not an expert on this, but somehow being able to take the perspective of the other person and practicing that.
I'm laughing because I actually did this with somebody. Oh my God, I was so annoying. So every time they would say something, I would respond back to them. And this is usually over text message. I would actually respond the way I wish they had responded to me.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, Dotty. That must be very difficult for you. How about blah, blah, blah? And then I would send it back to them. I literally did this for like a month.
Did it teach them?
Actually, it did. But yeah, he was super annoyed by it. Okay, you could stop now. I get it. I suck. And I'm like, that's the defensive part. But yeah.
But I mean, I think however you feel led to do it, but some type of role play or empathy exercises, conflict management tips, like using not inflammatory language, but like toning down the language if they have like inflammatory language, either party, and just using more. I find that using more neutral language usually helps alleviate the conflict.
And actually, she just did it in her own sentence. I have found that using That is exactly how you want to start these types of conversations.
No, but like more neutral language. Right. And there are conflict management tips that I have, and I'll give them to you in post. But yeah, there are certain techniques that you can use that help calm a situation down.
Right. I think I've already mentioned them before, but I stress these over and over. Don't start a question with the word why. It literally will put somebody on the defensive because they have to defend why. Just say, oh, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Or, oh, can you explain that to me again? I don't quite get it. Something like that. But don't ever question them why.
Or I would like to understand where you're coming from. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Exactly. And just note that if you suspect they're a narcissist, they have anxiety like you would not believe. So if they have that much anxiety, that's why you have to like tiptoe around them and try to deal with them.
I've told one person, and I tell people this, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up. It's just, and we all do it. Nobody's perfect. So I think the thing that's most important to me in terms of rebuilding a relationship is acknowledging the pain you caused somebody.
I don't know if
right, but I'm just saying in general,
would ever actually do that.
But I think in general that's how I like. If it's a normal conflict, like with a normal person, that's how I begin. But you can sense who you can talk to in a certain way, and whether they'll understand that or not.
Right.
But I just want to just like explain that to everybody. Like, no, we can't expect perfection.
Right. Well, how would you go about resolving a conflict that has to do with like them being really possessive or accusatory of you doing things you're not actually doing? How do you think they should go about dealing with that kind of conflict?
So an accusatory narcissist?
The possessive kind that always thinks you're seeing somebody, talking to somebody else with other people. I've seen the stalkers that never let you go.
That's dangerous. Right. I would actually seek to go to couples counseling and probably get a professional involved. But if you suspect that they're dangerous or that they're going to stalk you, I would probably walk away. And I know that sounds terrible. I would have a couple conversations and give them a chance. But if you suspect that it's so deeply entrenched in them, right, I would recommend that they seek out some type of assistance and just walk away. That's just me personally. But you can only make those calls and make those decisions for yourself.
I feel like with a lot of the extreme narcissists that they almost need to know how resolving a conflict is going to benefit them.
Yes. How does this benefit them? Yes, you can explain this will benefit you.
Because they don't understand your perspective.
No.
Okay, well, let's turn it around on you. Okay, if you want this to work out the way you need, this is your goal, right? In order to meet this goal and make this happen for you, this is what I need in order to make this happen.
Yeah, speaking their language. Right. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think that can be concurrent with empathy training on the other end, but also like explaining how it benefits them too. So they see both sides of the coin. It appeals to their inner sense, but also they can develop empathy for the other side with role play.
Right.
Yes.
So as a society that is dealing with rampant narcissism, and honestly, I feel like it's getting worse with digital media because people are not having normal social interaction. It's like all online and they're all talking through their phones and computers, and it's really taking the whole like person out of the equation. So narcissism is a little more common now because they're not understanding or reading between the lines, reading facial expressions, body language, whatever else. How do you think that we as a society need to curb that and become a more empathetic society and produce less narcissists?
Yes, no, I think that's a great question. So as a society as a whole, it's not only about narcissistic personality disorder, it's about abuse in general.
And social skills in general. Right.
And emotional intelligence in general. So I feel, and I know you've had similar ideas, that conflict management workshops, starting with conflict management workshops in schools that are age appropriate, K through 12, that deal with different issues that's not only just domestic violence, but like financial abuse, which can be a part of domestic violence, or different friendship problems, sexual harassment, just different typical problems that people may encounter, and role playing them as what to do in these types of situations even a parenting workshop in 12th grade.
You know what's interesting about this, though, is that I actually know just from the social work side of this society, they actually have these programs. They have programs training, in positive parenting. So you're not like you're parenting the right way and not coming from a narcissistic perspective, and you're not, and domestic violence training and conflict management. I feel like what we did was in preschool, we all taught each other how to say please and thank you and share and say I'm sorry to people. And then we skip. And then like the only time you're ever taught anything else is anti-bullying campaigns in high school now, or junior high probably now. And then also if you ever are convicted of like a crime or something, you're like forced to like go to these parenting classes, or you're forced to go to
it's not consistent
conflict resolution.
It's not consistent.
But
that's the problem.
They literally make you do it before, like they'll erase your record or whatever. And then they also the white collar role. If you go to a white collar job, a lot of times they'll have like these team building collaboration workshops and stuff. Yes. And we all learn how to use communication styles or whatever. They don't teach this in normal school. I'm like, dude, what happened to high school? Like, or junior high or elementary? Like, we went from preschool, be nice, there's a huge gap in yes, social skills.
It needs to be workshops every year. So yes. Like once a semester, age appropriate. Yes. And just build on it.
Integrated like they would any other subject. History built on itself, the science classes, math, they all built on each other. This needs to be one of them because honestly, it's more useful than like algebra, unless you're going to be an engineer, or more useful than, analyzing fiction books.
There's research that shows that people who are more empathetic tend to score higher on reading comprehension scores.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
And actually, even people who are more emotionally healthy, I would suspect that they do better in school if they're motivated, because in more emotionally stable people, you can focus better. If you have emotional problems or mental health issues, and I know this from personal experience, it's harder to focus on your schoolwork.
That is true. And it's interesting. Like, I know we said we weren't going to bring up politics and stuff, but if you look at like Donald Trump, a lot of people think he has narcissistic personality disorder. One time I was talking to a child and they were like, oh, I don't need to be nice. I don't need empathy. Look at Donald Trump. He's super successful. Yeah, well, he might be the exception to the rule. Like Steve Jobs was kind of a jerk too. And they are successful. But if you look at a majority of the successful people, they actually do have a higher emotional IQ. That's like the exception. You know what I mean?
I would agree with that.
Because they can network
to be better in business.
Yeah, exactly.
More emotionally intelligent people do better in business.
Please don't use Trump as your role model.
No.
He does not treat people well.
I know, and it's really sad. And honestly, I feel like it's important. Even let's say you're not the target of narcissistic abuse, if you see it happening to somebody else, be supportive to the victim. Talk to the narcissist if you can, if you feel safe. Make sure as a bystander you intervene appropriately, because you can make a difference not only in the victim's life, but the narcissist's life too.
You know what I actually think, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually wanted to ask you when you say reach out for support, I have to say that there are people that have been in chronically abusive relationships and their friends have completely given up on them. And they're like, well, she didn't listen to me, so I don't want to deal with it anymore. And then they just don't want to hear it and they drop them. And it will happen. It will actually happen with their friends, their family, and then they're completely alone in this situation. And it's harder for them to get out because they don't have a support network anymore because everybody told them to stay away from this person and they still did it. So what do you have to say to those people? How do they reach out for support when these people have just bailed on them for not agreeing with their decision to go back?
I would argue that those people should not have bailed out on them. That's just
no
me
doubt.
personally. I've heard of people complaining about this situation, and also people who abandon these people. They don't understand trauma bonds.
Yes.
They don't understand mental health. I don't think it's very nice that they complain about these victims of abuse. I've seen it online on Facebook, and it's very heartbreaking for me. I think those are not the right types of friends in general. I would go to a support group if there is one in your town or neighborhood. I would go to hotlines. I would go to a counselor if you can afford it, a church if you believe in that, or a mosque or a synagogue. I would reach out to people who actually understand and have a level of maturity and know what a trauma bond looks like.
I personally feel the same way. And I know this has happened before in friendship circles where somebody will keep repeatedly going back to a narcissist, and they've all dumped this person and they're like, I just can't support you anymore. I can't deal with this. And they all bail. And I feel like it re-traumatizes the person.
It's terrible.
Now you're dealing with another set of people who are being controlling over what you do, what you don't do, and you have no support there either. So it's like you have like multiple people trying to control you.
It's not up to them to judge
Exactly.
you. So if somebody repetitively goes back to an abuser, I would still be there for them.
Right.
And I would still like provide resources. I think it's very important not to judge victims, their mental health, who they are. You don't know them intricately or intimately. And I think it's very important to be supportive no matter what decisions they're making. And also, I think abusers of any type, they also need people to intervene and be there for them too. And I know that sounds weird, but they need intervention too. They need a support group saying, hey, you know, what you're doing isn't right. I'm going to be there for you, but I want you to know that I don't agree with it and I want to help you change.
Right.
If you can. If they start abusing you, then obviously that's a different story.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there is hope for both parties.
And you can draw those boundaries too with your friend of how much you will help. Call me if you ever decide to leave. I'll be here to listen when you're in these situations. But, you know, draw the boundary of how much you can actually listen to. Like if you only set a timer, if you only handle it for 30 minutes, I mean, protect your own mental health as well. But if everyone dumps this person, they're less likely to leave, and they'll feel even more isolated and trapped in that relationship. So I think that's really important to know.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I totally agree with that sentiment. You don't leave somebody in that situation.
Right.
No.
Well, Amelia, thank you for being on this show.
Thank you.
And we all want to aim for the middle. For those of you unfamiliar of what that phrase means, it's the premise of my podcast. It's basically aiming for the middle of any extremes in your thoughts and behaviors for a happier life.